The Curtiss SO3C Seamew was supposed to be the future of naval scouting, and when you look at the thing, it looked like exactly that. Sleek, all metal, modern, faster than the old biplane it was meant to replace. On paper, it was exactly what the US Navy thought it needed on the eve of the Second World War. A new shipboard scout that could fly farther, move faster, and drag naval aviation out of the 1930s. But the Seamew became one of the most embarrassing aircraft failures the Navy ever put to sea. The Seamew was a full fleet-level problem. It could not do the very mission it had been built for. It was so disappointing that the Navy ended up pulling the plane it replaced back into service. This video is brought to you by Saley. Before radar got good enough to handle over-the-horizon scouting, a warship that wanted to see over the horizon had to launch an airplane. They would catapult float planes out to hunt for ships, subs, or any sign of trouble. Then at the end of the sortie, land alongside in open water and hoist them back aboard. It was not glamorous flying, those missions were dangerous, so the airplane doing it had to be tough, predictable, and forgiving, and the Curtiss SOC Seagull did it perfectly. But by the late 1930s, the Seagull already looked outdated. It was a fabric-covered biplane with a center float and folding wings, more like something from the interwar years than the future of naval aviation. But it worked, and that mattered more than looks. But the problem was that the world was moving on. Naval aviation was getting faster, ranges were getting longer, and war in the Pacific was going to be fought across massive distances. The Seagull cruised at only around 133 miles an hour. That was fine when nobody was shooting at you. Range was becoming a problem too, and nobody looking ahead seriously thought the future belonged to fabric biplanes. So the Navy went looking for something more modern, faster, with long legs. In 1937, the Navy sent out specifications calling for a 2-seat mid-wing monoplane that could work both as a float plane and as a land plane. It had to use a removable center float, had to have folding wings so it could fit aboard ship, and it all had to stay under a pretty tight weight limit. That was already a demanding brief. But what made it dangerous was that it gave the airplane almost no spare margin anywhere. The new machine had to be a catapult float plane, a land plane, a folding wing shipboard aircraft, and a long-range scout, all while staying inside that weight limit. Every extra pound hurt, and every extra feature stole margin somewhere else, because the Seamew was being asked to do too many things at once, and that kind of design survives only if the engine is strong, and the basic airframe is exceptionally forgiving. The Seamew had neither. The Navy wanted the new airplane built around an experimental Ranger inverted V-12. On paper, it looked attractive. Low fuel consumption meant more range without lugging around extra fuel. That sounds great in a requirements meeting, but out in the real world, it was a bad bet. That engine was not mature or reliable enough for frontline naval use. And because the whole airplane was leaning on that engine's fuel efficiency to make up for everything else it was giving away, once the engine failed to come through, the whole design started to look weak, cramped, and short on breathing room. Curtiss and Vought both submitted designs, both got prototype contracts, and the two airplanes were tested against each other. The Curtiss prototype looked pretty sharp. All metal, stressed skin construction, clean lines, much more modern than the old Seagull. If you parked the two side by side, the Curtiss looked like the future, and the Seagull looked like it had wandered in from another era. In trials against the Vought entry, the two were close. The Vought was slightly faster, but heavier, so the Navy chose the Curtiss machine and ordered 300 of them. On paper, everything looked fine, but the design was already leaning heavily on everything going right. Before we get into how wrong it went, this video is sponsored by Saley. So if you've ever landed in another country and immediately started hunting for a local SIM card, queuing at some airport kiosk, or buying a dodgy one off a bloke outside the train station, Saley fixes that. It's an eSIM app, so there's no physical SIM to swap out. You download it before you travel, pick a data plan for wherever you're going, and you've got internet the moment you land. I used it when I was out filming recently, and it's so much easier than messing about with roaming or trying to find Wi-Fi everywhere. They cover over 200 destinations. You only install it once, so if you're hitting multiple countries, you don't need a new one each time, and the prices are way cheaper than roaming. Download the Saley app, Pick your destination and plan, and use code Dwayne'sAviation at checkout for an exclusive 15% discount. You can also go to sailly.com/Dwayne'sAviation. Links in the description. When Curtiss handed the prototype over for final Navy trials, the airplane immediately started showing its weak points. The engine overheated badly, and there were serious stability problems. It failed so badly that in July 1941, the prototype ended up sinking in shallow water. Curtiss rebuilt it, and the engine failed again that November. That is not the sort of confidence-building performance you want before committing to production. Curtiss sent the airplane to Langley Field for wind tunnel work and came back with a set of fixes. To stop the Ranger from overheating, they enlarged the air intake and added more cowl flaps. To tame the directional instability, they enlarged the tail, added a dorsal fin, and upturned the wingtips. But here is the thing about that dorsal fin. It extended aft over the rear observer's sliding canopy, which meant every time the observer opened his canopy to do his job, which is to observe, he broke the very surface that was keeping the aircraft stable. The fix for the stability problem was physically incompatible with the aircraft's primary mission. The modifications helped enough for the Navy to push ahead, and that is where things really went sideways, because the remaining problems were the kind you do not fully discover until you put the airplane into actual service on the ocean. Once Seamew started reaching the fleet in 1942, the whole thing went south fast. The first major problem was that for a reconnaissance floatplane, it could not get off the water with a full fuel load. Part of that came from the Navy increasing fuel requirements after production had already started, but from the pilot's seat, the reason does not matter. What matters is the airplane could not do the job it was bought for. If you can only launch with less than half your maximum fuel, your long-range scout is not a long-range scout anymore. It is just a compromised short-legged floatplane with a bad attitude. Then there was the float itself. In rougher water, the center float flexed badly enough that the prop could actually strike it. So now you had a scout plane that did not like rough water and could damage itself during normal sea operations. The Seamew is vicious during water takeoff. The nose-up attitude during the takeoff run was so steep that for a short period, the pilot basically lost aileron authority. In a floatplane, off open water, that kind of blind spot in the control picture is the sort of thing that gets people killed. A swell, a gust, or a minor pilot error could quickly become unrecoverable. None of these problems existed in isolation. The weak engine hurt water performance. The float added drag and complexity. The tight weight limit left no room for growth. The extra fuel requirement made an already marginal takeoff worse. Every weakness amplified the next one. That is how you get a machine that looks acceptable in pieces but fails as a system. That is the kind of machine pilots stop trusting very quickly. And once a shipboard scout loses the confidence of its crews, it is done. This was not a glamorous mission where pilots tolerated quirks because the airplane was fast or spectacular in combat. The entire value of the aircraft was that it had to be dependable in miserable conditions. The Seamew was the opposite. Ship after ship tried the Seamew, and ship after ship gave it back. On average, it lasted about 2 months aboard the vessels it was assigned to, and that tells you everything. And then came the final embarrassment. Because the Seamew was such a bust, the Navy had to bring back the old Curtiss SOC Seagull, the same supposedly outdated biplane the Seamew had been built to replace. The old fabric-covered machine went back onto the catapults and kept serving until 1945. The Seamew lost the argument not to a rival modern aircraft, but to the past. The Seagull may have looked obsolete, but it still had the one quality the Seamew never earned: trust. In total, around 795 Seamews were built, and even that understates the waste. The Navy ordered 659 of a lighter, improved SO3C variant before canceling the lot after only 39 had been delivered. Curtiss kept building aircraft that everyone already knew were bad. Some were converted into radio-controlled target drones, but even there the weak engine limited their usefulness. The British got around 100 under Lend-Lease and were not impressed either. Crews called it the Sea Cow. Most ended up in Canada as target tugs instead of doing anything useful. The Seamew failed because it was modern in appearance, but weak in the ways that mattered most. It promised speed, range, and progress, but delivered an underpowered, temperamental floatplane with no margin for the realities of naval service. The Navy wanted the future. What it got was an aircraft so flawed that the past had to come back and rescue it. So that's it for today's video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. It goes a long way for us.